When he gave the order to invade Ukraine in early 2022, Russia's President Vladimir Putin expected to see his sphere of power and influence grow. Some say he hoped to rebuild the Soviet Union bit by bit, starting with Ukraine before moving on to other territories, establishing himself as some sort of supreme leader, not just of Russia, but of numerous other nations too. Now, nearly 4 years later, the opposite is occurring. Putin has utterly failed to conquer Ukraine, and he's actually starting to lose control of several regions of Russia as well. History is repeating itself, and just as the Soviet Union once collapsed, Russia is beginning to suffer a similar fate, with genuine hints of separatism in the air. Nobody could have predicted this just a few years ago when the war first began. At that time, Russia appeared strong and unified, with Putin's power and influence absolute. The Russian population too largely supported the so-called special military operation in its early days, with many swayed or brainwashed by Kremlin propaganda on their TV sets and in their newspapers. While there was certainly some dissent, with many people going out on the streets to protest the invasion, large parts of the population simply nodded along, remained indifferent to the events, or even actively volunteered to go and fight on the front lines themselves. As time has gone by, however, the mood has well and truly shifted, and a recent Russian poll carried out by the Levada Center revealed just how sick and tired people are of the war. Around 2/3 of those polled, or 66% to be precise, said they would now prefer to see peace negotiations take place rather than continue combat. In certain groups, the percentage is even more significant, with 74% of women and 80% of the younger generation, aged 24 or below, wanting to see some sort of ceasefire or peace agreement as soon as possible, and only 27% of Russians stating that the fighting should continue. The poll also revealed what we already know: this war has come home to Russia at last. For a long time, many Russians could effectively bury their heads in the sand and not worry about what was happening in Ukraine. It was all hundreds or even thousands of miles away from them after all. They didn't see or feel the effects on any sort of personal level in the early stages, so didn't necessarily need to think about what was going on or form any sort of strong opinion on it one way or another. In a country where life is already tough, with high costs of living in many aspects and low quality of life as well, many people had enough of their own troubles to worry about. Over time, however, Ukraine has done what was needed to make the Russian people see the realities of this war for themselves. Kyiv's forces have not only carried out incursions over the Russian border, like the famous Kursk offensive of 2024, but have also conducted numerous long-range deep strike attacks on Russian airfields, oil refineries, command posts, ammunition depots, and various other high-value targets and pieces of military infrastructure far and wide across Russia's regions. Many of these attacks are witnessed and even captured on camera by everyday Russian people who now regularly see and hear the distinctive buzz of Ukrainian drones soaring overhead, on their way to take out another Russian pipeline, oil tank, or military asset. The Russian people are also feeling the effects of the war in countless other ways. Many have seen one or more people they know get injured in the conflict, for example, or even perish along the front lines of Ukraine, especially as some recent estimates suggest that Russia has suffered up to 1.4 million casualties since the full-scale invasion began. Others have friends or family members that are still alive but yet to return home, and they're forced to sit and wonder as the days go by whether they'll see their friends, their fathers, husbands, brothers, sons, and other close relatives ever again, or whether they will too simply be added to the Kremlin's colossal casualty numbers. Millions of Russians are also feeling the financial effects of the war, as the sheer weight of sanctions imposed by numerous Western countries across the Western world has gradually weakened the Kremlin's economy. The value of the ruble has declined while the cost of everyday goods and essentials, including everything from food to fuel, has risen. Speaking of fuel, many Russian regions currently face a dramatic fuel crisis too, due in large part to Ukraine's carefully orchestrated attacks on oil infrastructure. As a result, hundreds of gas stations have been left with no other option but to close down, and others have felt forced to impose strict limits on how much fuel each customer can purchase. In short, even for those who haven't actually lost anyone or been directly impacted by the war, it's still indirectly making their lives harder, with the money they earn and save worth far less than it once was, and countless personal freedoms, from freedom of travel to freedom of speech, restricted by the Kremlin. The poll proves that, as 58% of respondents said that the special military operation has affected their own lives or their families' lives somehow, and 22% going further, admitting that they have been greatly affected by it. And in some of Russia's regions, these angry, tired, and frustrated people are not simply sitting around and feeling sorry for themselves. They're actively starting to take action, leading calls for some sort of rebellion or movement to separate themselves and their lands from the rest of Russia, to cut ties with the Kremlin once and for all. One of the regions where this is taking place is the Sakha Republic, also known as Yakutia. The Sakha Republic is the largest federal subject of Russia by area and also the world's biggest country subdivision, covering more than 3 million square kilometers or close to 1.2 million square miles. It extends across a vast swathe of Russia's Far Eastern Federal District and is home to the city of Yakutsk, which famously holds the world record as the coldest major city on the planet. Originally home to various native and migratory peoples, the region was colonized by Russia in the 17th century. There has always been an undercurrent of resentment flowing through this part of Russia, with many people here angry at how their land has been treated by those in positions of power in Moscow. Evidently aware of this fact, Putin has gone to great lengths to exercise total control over the region and quell even the faintest possibilities of any uprising. He has used various legal reforms and imposed restrictions to constrain the republic's autonomy, and in 2016, he even set up a state program called Far Eastern Hectare, offering Russian citizens their own plots of land if they are willing to migrate to the Far East region. It's no surprise that Putin wants to keep a firm grip on the Sakha Republic, as the region is immensely rich in precious natural resources. It's home to one of the largest and deepest open-pit diamond mines in the world, the Mir mine, where diamonds were first found in 1955. The biggest diamond ever mined in Russia was also found there, earlier this year, measuring up at an astonishing 468 carats. Sakha is also rich in gold and gas, producing billions of dollars for the Russian economy every year, despite the fact that many of its people rank among the nation's poorest, struggling to get by, living in primitive housing and meager conditions. Thousands of people from this part of Russia have also fought and died in the war with Ukraine in far greater quantities than those from the richer regions. In fact, estimates suggest that around 40 times more Yakuts have been killed and wounded in Ukraine compared to soldiers from the Moscow district. This just goes to show the dramatic imbalance in the makeup of Putin's army, with so many people from poorer, neglected regions effectively forced to fight, while those in wealthier territories have the luxury of staying at home and continuing to enjoy their hefty salaries and comfortable lifestyles. Dealing with neglect and adversity for generations, the Sakha region of Russia has, in effect, become a powder keg, just waiting for a single spark to set the whole thing ablaze. Now it appears that the war in Ukraine could be that spark, and the entire region may be ready to blow, with a local member of parliament, Alexander Ivanov, recently making the bold move of openly discussing the region's need to separate itself from the rest of Russia. Speaking in September, Ivanov called for unity among all the many indigenous peoples that have been victims of Russia's colonization over the ages. He appealed directly to the likes of Tatars, Sakha people, Kumyks, Avars, Mari, and others to stand together as one against the Kremlin, bravely stating, "We have a common enemy, the Moscow colonizers, and we are not enemies of each other. Conflict between republics and indigenous peoples must not be allowed. This is exactly what Moscow wants. It is the foundation of its colonial power." The MP went on to urge a spirit of unity among the various people and cultures of Russia's eastern regions, encouraging them to overlook factors that may have been dividing them in the past, like religion, origin, and geographic barriers, and come together to face their common enemy side by side. Ivanov also cited the recent mass protests in Russia's Republic of Altai, where thousands of people have taken to the streets to make their voices heard. In this region too, Putin and his Kremlin cronies have been attempting to exert dominance and control, initiating various legal reforms and constitutional amendments that effectively eliminate local self-governance across the republic, taking power out of the hands of the indigenous people who have lived there for centuries and transferring it to higher-level authorities, loyal to the Kremlin cause. Fears are also rising that the Kremlin may have a more long-term goal to merge the Altai Republic with the neighboring Altai Krai region, which would take even more control and autonomy away from the Altai people. Thus, multiple mass demonstrations have occurred in the small and sparsely populated region over the course of 2025, led by 39-year-old local Aruna Anna, a human rights activist and journalist, as well as the head of the Council of Residents of the Altai Republic organization. Unsurprisingly, the Kremlin has cracked down on Anna, with Russian forces detaining her on September 24th on trumped-up charges of incitement of terrorism. But even with Anna behind bars, the movement she spearheaded is likely to continue, and the Kremlin cannot simply wave a magic wand and wipe away the anger, fear, and frustration of an entire population. Back in the Sakha Republic, Alexander Ivanov has called for local people and those of other nearby regions to take inspiration from the scenes in Altai and to challenge Moscow's authority at last. Some have already heeded the call, with many fighters from the region actually deciding to fight against Russia in the war with Ukraine. Numerous Yakuts have taken up arms as part of Ukraine's Siberian battalion, fighting off Russian forces, inspiring many of their fellow countrymen back home and dreaming of a future in which their home can once more be free. And it's not just in the Sakha Republic that waves of resistance and rebellion are rising up. In fact, in the region of Ingushetia, the situation is becoming much more explosive, to say the least. Situated in the volatile North Caucasus region, bordering Georgia, the Republic of Ingushetia is the smallest of all Russia's non-city federal subjects and is home to the indigenous Ingush people, with a total population of a little over 500,000 people. Statistically speaking, it's one of the poorest and most unstable regions in all of Russia, with a long and dramatic history of violence, corruption, and crime. In recent times, this tiny Muslim-majority republic has also become a mini war zone, with continuous clashes breaking out between the Ingush Liberation Army, which was founded in 2023, and Russian authorities. Almost every month, some sort of attack takes place. In June of this year, for example, Ingush militants used drones to attack a Russian border post in the North Ossetia region, killing 2 FSB officers in the process. In August, a series of coordinated arson attacks occurred on military depots in the Dagestan region, and the Ingush Liberation Army recently released videos showing its troops armed, organized, and on patrol, ready and waiting to receive their next orders. They are just one part of a larger trend spreading like wildfire across the Caucasus region. Another separatist formation has also formed there, known as the Caucasus Liberation Movement. It's made up of Chechens, Dagestanis, and Ingush people, all fighting side by side under the same banner with the same enemy, the Russian colonizers. Ukraine has been cleverly lending a hand to this movement, with Kyiv's main Directorate of Intelligence, GUR, providing all-important tactical intel to help the anti-colonial resistance fighters in their mission. Thanks to that, the movement was recently able to carry out a precise explosive attack on a Russian lieutenant colonel from a local counter-sabotage unit, killing the officer along with his driver and aide. Attacks like this send a message, and it's one that the Kremlin must be hearing loud and clear. All across Russia, people are sick and tired of being treated like cattle, with countless sons and brothers and husbands plucked from the streets and sent to die in the fields of Ukraine. They're tired of having their homelands ravaged and exploited to line the pockets of the Moscow elite, and they're not going to take it any longer. And if the Kremlin isn't willing to listen and help these people, then Kyiv will happily step in. That's exactly what the Ukrainian GUR has been doing, with the agency's chief, Kyrylo Budanov, leading the charge to inspire the separatists, fuel the rebellions, and encourage ethnic minorities and indigenous people all over Russia to stand up to the Kremlin and make themselves heard. Many analysts have now taken to calling this strategy Budanov's blueprint, and it's very simple but remarkably effective. In regions like Sakha, Altai, Ingushetia, and beyond, all Budanov's operatives are basically doing is telling the truth. They're telling the people what is actually happening in this war, highlighting the facts and statistics that show how the Kremlin has targeted minorities and poorer regions in its recruitment, sending thousands upon thousands of Yakuts, Dagestanis, Ingush, and other indigenous people to their graves in Ukraine, using them as nothing more than disposable cannon fodder in a wasteful war that has no end in sight. They're explaining how, even though people in these regions make up less than 10% of Russia's total population, they somehow account for around 40% of all its contract soldiers. And when communities hear these statistics and understand that once again they are the ones being exploited and abused, while Kremlin officials and Moscow elites live the high life, it reminds them of the countless other examples in the past when their lands and their people have been treated as less worthy, less important, and even less human. That, in turn, inevitably brings up a lot of anger that has been growing from generation to generation, rising up and ready to erupt. Ukrainian intelligence operatives are also actively reaching out and making contact with the people who are ready and willing to bring about change. The underground networks of insurgents and exiled activists. They're giving them intelligence, training, and logistics, helping them build the foundations they need to actually launch some sort of fight back against their Kremlin oppressors. From Ukraine's perspective, it's a win-win situation. The more turmoil and unrest spreads within Russia, the weaker the Kremlin becomes, as Russian society will continue to fracture, resentment will rise, and Putin's image as an all-powerful, always-in-control leader will slowly but surely start to crumble. Plus, if Russia has to dedicate money, resources, and possibly even soldiers to combating uprisings in its own regions, it will have fewer resources to spend fighting Ukraine. And it's not just indigenous people and ethnic minorities that are getting sick and tired of the war and the Kremlin's actions. As the aforementioned poll proves, the majority of Russians, regardless of their age, origins, or background, are eager to see this conflict come to an end. Very few support the prospect of continued military action in Ukraine, and many are simply desperate to return to a state of peace. This is exactly what Putin would have been dreading. He's tried so hard to keep the people on side throughout the war in Ukraine, That's one of the reasons why he always insists on calling it a special military operation, as it doesn't quite have the same associations and connotations that come with the word war. He also used all the usual tricks in his playbook, spreading lies and propaganda, covering up the truth and twisting the narrative to paint a false picture of how the war is progressing and why it matters so much. He's even gone to the trouble of restricting or blocking access to numerous online news outlets and popular websites like YouTube to make it as hard as possible for everyday Russian people to learn the truth of what's really happening in Ukraine. But all of Putin's hard work is well and truly unraveling. Whether it's indigenous people in Altai mourning the loss of their loved ones in Ukraine, or citizens of major cities like Nizhny Novgorod having to spend a massive chunk of their salary just to fill their cars with gas, countless Russian people are feeling the effects of the war like never before, and the more they see, the angrier they get. It may therefore be only a matter of time before whispers of rebellion and fledgling separatist movements become a full-scale fragmentation of the Russian Federation. You can learn more about how the situation is deteriorating by the day for Vladimir Putin in this video, looking at how even the president's own propagandists have started to turn against him, with one Russian TV host recently admitting that Ukraine will never fail. Or check out this video revealing the shocking statistics behind Russia's failed summer offensive and what it means for the war moving forward. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our trusted channel too, so that you can stay informed and aware of everything that's happening in Ukraine, Russia, and other countries across the globe. And thank you for watching.